My name is Lisa Groskopf. I'm a visual artist based in Vienna. I work across media, meaning I do basically everything but painting, but my main focus is on photography, video and performance. However, I don't limit myself to those media. I rather normally have an artistic research and then I seeking a suitable medium how to convey my artistic insights. While I was working and living in Japan for the last couple weeks, I was conducting research on female body in photography. I encountered two, let's call them photo rituals that are strongly connected to the notion of femininity. To make it a little bit more specific, I was working on pericolo machines and omiai photography that is used in Japanese matchmaking. I found out that they are quite strongly connected to a rather rigid idea of what it means to be a woman, very strongly related to the notion of cuteness and innocence in the case of pericolo photography, and conveying a quite conservative role model of Japanese women in the case of matchmaking photos in omiai photography. So I try to address these photos from a feministic point of view and juxtapose it with a wider idea of what a woman can be. So I tried to deconstruct the idea of gender in a way. I went to Shinjuku to take pericolo photos. You will always find a lot of different booths where you can take those photos. And I found out all the places are quite the same because there are different companies who have their specific booths and it's always actually more or less the same. For me it was important because pericolo machines are mainly targeted for Japanese girls who are a little bit smaller than I am. So it's a little bit difficult to take this photo because I always need to be like this. So I only found one booth that offers a bench so I could sit down and it was easier. So I always went to that specific booth to take those photos in different places in Shinjuku. For omiai photography, I did some research about those photo studios who offered omiai photography, and I found one in Ginza, which is quite funny, as I think. So I went to this traditional photo studio where they have a specific room that I think it's dedicated for omiai photography. They have this fake living room set up. I think that's quite interesting about those omiai photos. They shouldn't look like it was taken in a photo studio, so normally they won't have a plain background, but rather this fake living room environment to pretend that it's a casual photo taken in my fancy living room, sitting there waiting for my future husband to find me. So I think it's quite an interesting photo genre. Well, omiai photography was for me especially interesting because we don't have anything that is comparable to that in Austria. We don't have this sort of matchmaking culture. I don't know if it existed in the past. I don't have any knowledge about it. But since I've never heard about it, I don't think it existed in the past either. So this was interesting for me because we don't have anything in that sense in Austria. I don't know if I can have an objective perspective on a female-only university. I've been here too little time, and also due to the language barrier, I can only observe on a superficial level. Anyhow, I think it's quite an interesting idea to have a school for female students only. I think if we had something like this in Austria, which we don't, it would be something quite conservative, very strongly connected maybe to the Roman Catholic Church. So I think it wouldn't have that liberty, that emancipatory aspect that I can feel in Joshibi University. I think here it can be something really interesting to have a school only for girls or for young women, as they got more space. I have the feeling normally male students, they take a lot of space, they take a lot of attention, and it might be a really good environment for female students to find their artistic voice. Well, I had the privilege to be invited as a guest lecturer to a couple of classes. So it was really interesting for me to see how a class looked like in Joshibi University. But for me, it's difficult to say how much of what I observed is connected to the fact that it's a female-only school, or to the fact that it's Japan, because Japan on its own is a quite different culture, and I can imagine that students here or university here looks quite different than it would in Austria. So for me, it's very difficult to understand everything. Like, not only because I don't know the language, but also because the whole behavior is quite much different. So for me, it was quite interesting to see that many students seemed a little bit shy, and I don't know if this is due to the fact that they cannot communicate with me directly because many of them don't know English, or because it's also a little bit of Japanese behavior, which is quite different to Austria's. So 2.5 months is a very short time to really get significant insights. I'm still on the discovery level. So this is, for that reason, it's quite difficult for me to understand the university fully. I think it's really good that there's a female-only university in Japanese context. I feel there's still a lot to fight for when it comes to women in the arts. The whole art world, the global art world, is still a boys' club, and it's so much more difficult for female artists to get inside the international art market, to become teachers in school or even deans in school. So there's still a long way to go. And I think having a school that is dedicated to female students might contribute to this mission. While I was in Japan, I worked on the notion of gender from a feministic point of view. This is not my only concern in my artistic practice. I rather always look at the micro and macro systems I'm surrounded by from my specific role. So I tend to look at the art system because I'm an artist. And as I'm a woman, I also look at society. And then I employ a feministic point of view, considering myself to be a feminist. But it's rather that I'm interested in systems and structures, and then try to develop a body of work that reflects on what I'm observing in the different roles I'm having in daily life, in my artwork, in my being a woman. In the past, we used to have gender-divided schools, so boys and girls did not go to the same school. So in the course of being more open, those schools didn't have the division any longer. Due to several reasons, I cannot imagine to have a female-only school in Austria. We rather had the tradition to have gender-divided schools, and it was an achievement to don't have these schools anymore, especially due to the fact that normally those boys' schools were considered to be the better schools. And also it was very strongly connected to the Catholic Church. So it was really a big step not to have gender-divided schools. And then there's another thing, which is, I don't know how wide it is discussed in Japan, but in Europe there's this heavily discussion about gender in general. So there's this tend to that we try to blur the boundaries between gender. There are people who don't identify either as male or female. So if we had a female-only school, we would again emphasize this binary concept of gender that we try to get away with from. So I cannot imagine that this would now be considered as something progressive, but rather the opposite. It would be a really conservative idea now in the Austrian context to have a female-only school.